What's up, everybody? It's Dan from SageMathTutoring.com, and I'm going to make a short video about certain algebra concepts that have to do with setting up equations and things like that. So let's dive into it. An artist typically earns $500 for her products each week. Boom. But this amount can vary by $40 depending on multiple factors. And the first part is to write an absolute value inequality representing the situation, and then the next part is to solve it. So writing an absolute value inequality representing the situation. So I have found that the following structure is pretty helpful for these particular problems. So we would say x minus, we could say the typical amount, all right, typical amount, has to be less than or equal to the, let's say the varied amount. So the typical amount in this case is $500, and the varied amount in this case is 40. So in my opinion, to sort of embrace this structure is a good way of just avoiding confusion. So it's going to be x minus 500 in there is less than or equal to 40. And then they want you to solve it. So if you were to solve that, what I would strongly recommend is I would go ahead and drop the parentheses or drop the absolute value symbols and preserve the original inequality. But I would also go off to the side or underneath and flip the inequality and then flip the sign of this number here. And then you would just solve each. So this would, of course, be x is less than or equal to 540. And in this case, it would be x is greater than or equal to, looks like that's 460. So we know that x has to be between 460 and 540. And that's something we could graph as well. Looking at this one, generally speaking, how can you write an equation representing how much money you're making if you're bringing in a set amount and a variable amount? So you could say that the amount of money you're making is, let's say, revenue. Okay, that's how much money you're bringing in. And that will always equal the set amount, which is a constant, plus the variable amount, which would be, we could say, well, I'll just call it the variable amount. Now, that might seem really abstract, and you might be wondering what the heck I'm talking about. But let's say you make $50 in tips, and you make $2 for every item that you sell, right? Well, the $50 doesn't change. That's the set amount. Whatever is the amount that sort of doesn't change, we could call the set amount. And this is the variable amount because this amount of money that you're making depends on how many items you sell. So we could call that 2x. So we could say the revenue in that case would be equal to 50 plus 2x. All right. Now for 2b, generally speaking, how can you represent profit with an equation? Well, the profit will always be whatever your revenue is, which is how much money you're bringing in, minus your expenses. All right. Now, if you want to know what your revenue is, you might want to refer to this, right? But one way or the other, that's how you would find profit. It's always going to be the revenue, the amount of money you're bringing in, minus the amount of money that you have to pay, we could say, to stay in business. 3a, generally speaking, how can you algebraically represent a range of values between two extremes? Well, that's easy. You would put the variable in between the max, we could say, and the min, right? So for example, if the extremes were 100 as the max and 60 as the min, well, we could put x in between those. And how would you graph that? Well, it kind of depends. If we were to graph this, you can notice that x is less than or equal to 100 and x is greater than or equal to 60. So one thing you could definitely do is you could certainly write down your critical values. And since it's greater than or equal to and less than or equal to, then you're going to have a solid circle there, a solid dot, and then you would have everything in between. But you need to be careful because if it's the case that x is not allowed to be 60, but it can be greater than 60, and x is not allowed to be 100, but it has to be less than 100, then you would have your critical values, but now it would be an open circle in between. All right, 4a, rewrite the formula for the area of a circle solving for the radius r. Well, the area of any circle is pi r squared, right? Pi r squared. And in order to find the area of the circle, solving for the radius r, well, we would have to get this r by itself. And in order to do that, we would have to divide both sides by pi. Next thing you know, we would have a over pi equals radius squared. And then at that point, you would have to take the square root of both sides. Now, typically when you do the square root, you would say plus minus over here, but we're not going to do that. It's just going to be r because r has to be positive, so it's going to be r equals the square root of the area over pi. Okay, so that would be an example of solving for r. Okay, basically whenever you're dealing with, this is called a literal equation, whenever you're solving for a particular variable in a literal equation, it's really just about getting that variable by itself. Now, why is this new equation useful? Well, it's useful because what if the teacher says, what's the radius when the area is 20 units squared, 20 square units, okay? So in other words, this equation is useful when you're given information about the area and you're asked to find the radius. Because you can literally just use the equation as a tool where you plug in that area of 20 for A and you put that over pi, and then you would basically just use your calculator and figure out, what that is. All right. But in other words, this revised equation is really helpful when you have information about the area and you want to use that to find the radius. All right, so very short video today, probably one of my shortest videos, but this is sort of specifically for a student of mine that I do believe these concepts will be helpful with, and for the rest of you, I hope it was helpful as well, and I will talk to you later. Bye.